What we know about this scene suggests a very calculated and pragmatic kind of thing. But the idea is that I still think that probably the person knew her because of the comfort level. And so it suggests to me that they should be talking to anybody that has had a passing connection with her that would require some knowledge of her finances or the inside of her home or her property or something like that. And that can include people that are very intimately aware of you, all the way down to people that just come to the house for trade work or services or anything like that. But I definitely agree that the radius around the crime scene of people that are going to know something or have encountered the type of person to do this is not very gigantic. I think you're talking about somebody sort of within, a small radius of that house.
The desert heat of Tucson, Arizona usually carries a sense of stillness, but 74 days ago, that silence was shattered by an absence that defied logic. Imagine an 84-year-old woman, Nancy Guthrie, living a life defined by routine and the quiet comfort of her own four walls. Then, in a heartbeat, she is gone. Not just missing, but snatched. Vanished into the thin, dry air of the Southwest, leaving behind only questions and a trail of blood that tells a story no one was prepared to hear. For over 2 months, the search has been relentless, yet the void remains. No suspect in handcuffs. No Nancy. Just the haunting reality that a grandmother was taken from the one place she should have been safest. As we dive into this dark mystery, we look to the boots on the ground reporting of Brian Enton, he who has lived this case alongside the Guthrie family since the beginning. Enton, known for his deep investigative dives, has brought a chilling perspective to the forefront. This wasn't a random act of chaos. Through his work with world-renowned forensic researchers like Dr. Gary Brucato, a man who spends his days peering into the minds of the world's most dangerous predators, a terrifying profile has begun to emerge. It's a profile built not on guesswork, but on the cold, hard mathematics of murder and abduction. When you look at the statistics of violent crime, the numbers are as steady as a heartbeat and twice as cold. Dr. Brucato points to a staggering reality. In cases like this, up to 92% of female victims know their killer. That percentage isn't just a number, it's a roadmap.
Important things to bear in mind is that in those situations, it is usually someone who knows you. Now, let's say this is actually a homicide. Up to 92%, according to some reports, up to 92% of people who are killed in the United States know their killer in some way. The estimates are between 76 and 92%, according to the various literature I've read. So you think about that and you say, okay, so this person who did this probably has some passing relationship, at least, with this victim. And that matches some of the comfort level, potentially spending quite a lot of time in the house and things like that.
It suggests that the person who shattered Nancy's world didn't come from the shadows of the unknown, but perhaps from the sunlight of her own life. A passing acquaintance, a former contractor, or someone who had stood in her kitchen and noted the vulnerability of an 84-year-old woman living alone. In this series, we are going to peel back the layers of this investigation, guided by Enton's reporting and Brucato's forensic breakdown. We will explore the waiter and the chef theory, the idea that the person caught on camera might just be the face of a much deeper, more organized web of betrayal. Was this a botched ransom attempt, or something far more personal? As the desert sun sets on another day without answers, we begin our journey into the dark heart of the Nancy Guthrie case. If you want to stay updated as this investigation unfolds and more chapters of this story are revealed, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. If Nancy's story has moved you, please like this video and share it to keep her name in the public eye. We need your help to ensure justice isn't just a concept, but a reality. Do you believe the 92% statistic holds the key to finding Nancy's captor? Or are we looking at a rare, random predator? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. To understand the tragedy of Nancy Guthrie, one must first understand the life that was interrupted. Nancy wasn't just a headline or a case file. She was a pillar of her Tucson community, a woman whose life was woven into the fabric of the desert landscape she called home. At 84, she possessed a quiet dignity, living in a home that was a sanctuary of memories. She was a mother, a grandmother, and the matriarch of a family that included her daughter, Savannah, a woman whose own public profile would eventually turn this local disappearance into a national firestorm. Those who knew Nancy described her as a woman of habit, independent, yet vulnerable in the way only the elderly can be. She wasn't a woman of secrets, but she was a woman of means, and in the predatory eyes of a criminal, that wealth was a target. Brian Enton's reporting reveals a woman who was perhaps too trusting, living in a world where she believed the walls of her home were thick enough to keep the darkness out. But forensic experts like Dr. Brucato warn that vulnerability is a magnet for a specific kind of predator, the opportunistic strategist. Then there is the suspect, or rather, the silhouette of one. The person captured on the security feed wasn't a phantom. They were a physical presence that moved with a chilling coolness under pressure. As Enton and Brucato analyze the footage, they see someone who doesn't flinch, someone who takes their time. This isn't the behavior of a panicked amateur. It's the hallmark of a psychopathic character structure. This individual, whom Brucato theorizes could be the waiter in a much larger scheme, moved through Nancy's world with a comfort level that suggests he had been there before. The background of this crime is a study in contrasts. The warmth and stability of Nancy's life versus the cold, calculated intent of those watching her. Investigators have spent weeks combing through the lives of everyone who had access to her home. Contractors, service workers, people who knew the layout of her hallways and the timing of her days. Somewhere in the intersection of Nancy's kindness and the suspect's greed lies the hidden tension that snapped on that fateful night. The profile suggests a chef behind the curtain, a mastermind who knew Nancy's finances and perhaps even her heart, orchestrating a disappearance that was never meant to be a mystery for this long. The warning signs didn't appear as a sudden storm. They were the subtle, shifting shadows of a predator moving into position. In the weeks leading up to the abduction, the atmosphere around Nancy's home began to change, though few could have seen the patterns at the time. According to the data-driven analysis shared by Brian Enton, the suspect's behavior on the night of the crime suggests a level of preparation that only comes from a pre-existing comfort level. This wasn't a crime of passion or a spontaneous break-in. It was a targeted operation. Forensic researcher Dr. Gary Brucato notes several red flags in the way the perpetrator interacted with the environment. One of the most bizarre and chilling moments caught on camera was the suspect picking up shrubbery or flowers and waving them toward the security lens. To the untrained eye, it looks like a moment of madness or a taunt. But to a profiler, it signals a disturbing lack of fear. The suspect was cool under pressure, showing none of the physiological signs of panic, like shaking or hurried movements, that even seasoned criminals often display during a high-stakes home invasion.
Alongside what we're glimpsing on the camera. What I was very struck by, and I know that Mary Ellen O'Toole, for example, the prominent profiler, has made the same point. A lot of what we're seeing is somebody who is way too cool under pressure, looks not even flinching under pressure. And that kind of person that we see, when we see that, we start thinking about a person who probably has some psychopathic character structure, because even somebody who is frequently committing crime, who isn't psychopathic, is going to look a little nervous. They're going to do some things that show physiological evidence of being a little scared of getting caught. This person took time to conceal his identity and to not leave traces, but clearly is unafraid. The reason that's extremely important is because when we're dealing with somebody with that kind of character structure, the probability is very high that the person has had a long history of either inappropriate behavior that people would remember or criminal behavior. So that the individual that is on the camera looks to me like somebody who may very well have come into contact with law enforcement previously. And so there are two things I would be doing, because I really believe this person is local because of the comfort.
This lack of anxiety is a massive red flag for a psychopathic personality. It suggests an individual who is reactive to insult but indifferent to threat. They didn't care about the cameras because they felt they were in control. Furthermore, the waiter on the screen exhibited signs of being a lower-functioning primitive type. He made amateurish mistakes like failing to wear his holster correctly or choosing a firearm that didn't even match the gear he was carrying. These technical failures suggest that while he was willing to do the dirty work, he lacked the sophistication to plan such a high-stakes abduction on his own. The most significant red flag, however, lies in the why. Why target Nancy Guthrie? In the world of forensic statistics, criminals usually choose the path of least resistance. Targeting the mother of a high-profile figure like Savannah Guthrie brings an international spotlight that most kidnappers would desperately avoid. This illogical choice points toward a personal grudge or a specific inside knowledge of her finances. It suggests that someone, somewhere in Nancy's circle, was whispering in the waiter's ear, a chef behind the scenes who had identified Nancy not just as a victim, but as a prize. The tension was building in the shadows of the Tucson suburbs, a predator waiting for the moment the precious cargo was most vulnerable. The silence of the Tucson night was not broken by a crash of glass or the scream of an alarm, but by the cold, calculated entry of a predator who knew exactly which door to turn. When the crime finally unfolded, it was a sequence of events that Dr. Gary Brucato describes as calculated and pragmatic, yet fundamentally flawed. Nancy Guthrie, an 84-year-old woman who likely struggled with the vulnerabilities of her age, perhaps her hearing aids were out, or she was simply lost in the deep sleep of the elderly, found herself face-to-face with a nightmare. The physical evidence left behind tells a harrowing story. Brian Enton's reporting has highlighted the presence of blood at the scene, a grim signature that suggests the struggle was immediate. Dr. Brucato analyzes this through a clinical lens. Did the blood come from a deliberate act of violence, or was it the result of a botched abduction? The profile suggests that Nancy was intended to be precious cargo, a high-value asset meant for a financial ransom. But an 84-year-old heart is fragile. On the way out the door, the waiter, the clumsy, unrefined suspect seen on camera, may have caused a fall or a medical emergency that turned a kidnapping into a potential homicide in a matter of seconds. The cinematic horror of the moment is captured in the shrubbery incident. As the suspect moved Nancy from her sanctuary, he paused to wave a branch or flowers in front of the security camera. It was a moment of surreal arrogance. To Enton and the forensic team, this wasn't just a taunt. It was a distraction or perhaps a primitive attempt to mask his path. It revealed a man who was comfortable enough to linger in the presence of his victim, yet foolish enough to leave a digital trail. But the most shocking element of the crime wasn't what was taken, it was what was left behind. In a typical robbery, drawers are ransacked and jewelry is swiped. Here, nothing was missing except Nancy. This was an elimination or abduction event, one where the victim was the only target. As she was ushered into the darkness of the Arizona desert, she was without her vital medications, without her support system, and in the hands of someone who, according to the statistics, likely viewed her as nothing more than a bargaining chip that was rapidly losing its value. The crime was a bridge between two worlds, the quiet life Nancy lived and the dark psychopathic reality of the men who decided her time was up. The aftermath of the abduction was not a frantic getaway, but a chillingly calm attempt to erase a human life. And as the initial hours bled into days, the investigation, spearheaded by law enforcement and tracked relentlessly by Brian Enton, hit a wall of silence. There were no immediate ransom calls, no demands for money within the typical 24 to 48-hour window. This silence, according to Dr. Gary Brucato, is one of the most significant forensic markers of the case. In a standard kidnapping, the victim is precious cargo. You keep them alive. You provide proof of life. But with Nancy, there was only a void. The digital and forensic trail left by the suspect reveals a clumsy cover-up. We see a man who was careful enough to wear a mask, but foolish enough to get caught on camera with a mismatched holster and a visible weapon. As investigators combed through the Tucson area, the search pivoted to the radius of the crime scene. Enton's reporting suggests that the police began looking at the fringe of society, the people who live in the no-good patches of the local area. Dr. Brucato's profile insists that the waiter seen on camera likely has a criminal history, someone known to local law enforcement or even currently sitting in a jail cell for a different crime. Then came the ransom notes, bizarre, confusing, and potentially sadistic. One note in particular sent a shiver through the investigation claiming, "We didn't know how weak her heart was." If real, this note is what Brucato calls bad writing, an illogical attempt at sympathy from a person who had just committed a brutal act. It suggests the abduction went south, almost immediately. The suspect, finding himself with an unresponsive or deceased victim, had to shift from kidnapper to eliminator. The investigation turned toward the spiderweb theory. Somewhere at the center of this web is the chef, the mastermind who likely knew Nancy or her daughter Savannah, and directed the waiter to do the dirty work. Brian Enton notes that the $1 million reward remains untouched, a fact that baffles experts. There is no honor among thieves, yet no one has turned. This suggests a terrifying alternative, that the accomplices are either too afraid of the mastermind to speak, or, as Brucato grimly theorizes, they have already been eliminated themselves to ensure the center of the web remains hidden in the desert sand. As the investigation into Nancy Guthrie's disappearance stretched into the spring of 2026, the silence from the desert began to be replaced by the cold, clinical reality of the legal system. In the world of high-stakes crime, the courtroom often begins long before a gavel hits the wood, and for Nancy, it started with the forensic profiling of her potential captors. Brian Enton's reporting has focused on the agonizing wait for DNA results, a process that Dr. Gary Brucato warns is far from the instant gratification seen on television. In a case where the crime scene is calculated and pragmatic, the legal aftermath hinges on the blend of DNA left behind. Investigators are currently tasked with meticulously teasing apart microscopic traces that could take a year or more to finalize. The strategy, as Enton has tracked, he was moving toward the use of genealogical data, the same revolutionary technique that trapped killers like Brian Kohberger. This is the modern digital dragnet, searching for the chef by finding the distant relatives of the waiter. While no one has yet stood before a judge for Nancy, the trial is already playing out in the minds of those involved. Dr. Brucato suggests that once the first domino falls, once that clumsy individual from the security footage is identified, the spiderweb will rapidly unravel. In the eyes of the law, there is very little honor among thieves, and the million-dollar reward remains a silent, heavy inducement. The prosecution's eventual case will likely rely on flipping an underling, someone who was willing to do horrible things, but isn't especially bright, against the mastermind behind the curtain. But there is a darker legal reality that Enton and Brucato must address: the elimination murder. If Nancy is indeed deceased, the statistics suggest a grim probability that her remains were hidden in a way to eliminate every trace of the crime. In 2026, offenders are hyper-aware of forensic advancements. They know that a single hair or a drop of fluid can lead to a life sentence. As the Guthrie family waits for a breakthrough, the legal pursuit isn't just about finding a suspect. It's about navigating a maze where the culprits have worked tirelessly to make it look like a total stranger committed a motiveless crime, all while the evidence points back to someone who knew her best. Behind the true crime headlines and the forensic percentages lies the shattered heart of a family and a community left in a state of suspended grief. See, Brian Enton's reporting has consistently centered on this human cost, documenting a reality that no statistic can fully capture. For 74 days, the Guthrie family has lived in a landscape of what-ifs, their lives bifurcated into the time before Nancy vanished and the agonizing now. The emotional toll is perhaps most visible in Savannah Guthrie. As a public figure, her search for her mother has played out on a national stage, but the pain is deeply private. Dr. Gary Brucato notes that the ripple effect of a crime like this extends far beyond the yellow tape of the Tucson property. It creates a climate of fear among the elderly in Arizona, a realization that the sanctity of one's home can be breached by someone who might have once been welcomed inside. The community's reaction has been a mix of intense solidarity and growing suspicion. In a case where the suspect is likely someone she knew, neighbors are forced to look at one another differently. Every contractor, every delivery driver, and every passing acquaintance becomes a potential waiter in the minds of a frightened public. This is the nasty personality structure of the crime. It doesn't just take a life. It erodes the trust that holds a neighborhood together. Yet amidst the darkness, there is a desperate hope for closure. Enton has highlighted the million-dollar reward as a symbol of the family's resolve, a beacon meant to tempt the honor among thieves. But as the weeks turn into months, the emotional weight shifts from the shock of the abduction to the grueling marathon of a cold case. The Guthrie family remains indebted to the investigators and reporters keeping Nancy's name alive, even as they face the heartbreaking forensic probability that the person they love may never be returned to them intact. Theirs is a vigil held in the shadow of a spiderweb, waiting for a single thread to snap and finally bring Nancy home. As the sun sets over the Catalina foothills, the shadow of the man with the flowers remains burned into the digital memory of a doorbell camera, a haunting reminder that the desert doesn't always give up its secrets easily. For more than 70 days, the Nancy Guthrie case has defied the simple logic of a typical crime. It is a story where the statistics point towards someone known, yet the evidence remains frustratingly mixed. trapped in the microscopic complexities of a DNA profile that investigators are still fighting to decode. Through the dedicated reporting of Brian Enton and the forensic breakdowns of experts like Dr. Gary Brucato, we are left to grapple with a chilling reality. This wasn't just a disappearance. It was a collision between a vulnerable woman's quiet life and the cold mechanics of a psychopathic plan. Whether it was a financial abduction that crumbled in the face of a medical crisis or a more personal act of elimination, the truth is currently held close by those who move in the no-good patches of society. They are waiting, perhaps, for the pressure to fade. But as long as the Guthrie family and the public demand answers, the spotlight will not dim. The $1 million reward stands as a testament to the fact that someone, somewhere, knows the chef behind this waiter. In the end, we are left with the image of a grandmother taken from her sanctuary, and a community forever changed by the realization that sometimes the greatest dangers are the ones that have stood on our doorsteps before. As the forensic machines continue to hum and the investigators peel back the layers of the spiderweb, the only question that remains is not if the truth will surface, but who will be the first to break the silence. Thank you for following this deep dive into the Nancy Guthrie investigation on True Crime Tales. This is a developing story, and we are committed to bringing you every update as it breaks. If you found this analysis insightful, please like this video and share it to help keep Nancy's story in the national conversation. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new chapter in our search for justice. The statistics say there's a 92% chance Nancy knew her captor. Based on everything you've seen, the shrubbery, the bad writing of the notes, and the clumsy mistakes, do you think the suspect is still hiding in plain sight within her local circle? Let us know your theories in the comments below.